This video is sponsored by Ask Fred and Dragon Slayer's Credentialing and Consulting. Hey guys, it's Cyrus of Chaos. I'm here today to talk to you about a controversy that's happening at the Doha Grand Prix this coming weekend. The controversy has to do with how the event was scheduled. Now, every senior World Cup, Grand Prix, and World Championships that I've been aware of since I first started competing in 2009 has been exactly the same format. Namely, that format is pools and preliminary matches on the first day, and then either the next day in the case of a single gender event, or perhaps 2 days later in the case of both men and women competing at the World Cup, you have the main draw. And in this competition, in the invitation, without any additional notice or anything, they announced that in addition to pools and preliminary matches on the first day, they would also have the main draw of 64 at the end of that day. Now, in order to understand why that's a weird decision, let's just explain how the seeding at these events work. So, numbers 1 through 16 in the world are automatically put into the main draw, seeded 1 through 16, which is a huge advantage. You do not have to do pools, you don't have to do any preliminary DEs, and you automatically get the best seeding possible, which no one else can get in the competition. Huge advantage, and it essentially means that the top 16 in the world do not have to fence on the first day at all. So the next 17 through 32, those slots in the main draw are filled by the people who got top 16 out of pools. So anyone who's top 16 out of pools gets put into the main draw seeded 17 through 32. That leaves 32 available slots in the main draw, and the way that those slots are determined is everyone else who didn't get directly promoted or didn't get cut off the bottom, those people compete for 32 remaining spots in the main tableau. And when they finish their preliminary 64, there's 32 people left. Those seeds are rebalanced, and then they're put into the main tableau, seeded between 33rd and 64th. So now you have your full tableau of top 16 people in the world, seeded 1 through 16, top 16 out of pools, seeded 17 through 32, and everyone else who didn't get eliminated, fenced all the way until the preliminary 64 was over to be seeded 33 through 64. Now, the reason that this decision is so odd in the case of the Doha Grand Prix is that having the main draw of 64 at the end of the preliminary day would mean that any top 64 fencer would be required to show up to this competition just to fence one round. And it's a little bit odd for someone who hasn't fenced at all to fence someone who has fenced DEs in at least 2 of them, perhaps 3, because épée tournaments are quite large, and a round of pools. And in order to get that far, the person is necessarily fencing pretty well. And it would be like the American equivalent of Daryl Homer winning a knack and then having to fence Colin Heathcock. Someone who on paper is seated higher than him, but it's kind of an odd situation because the person who just came out of it is fencing extremely well. The person who is not coming out of it and just kind of is put in is fencing cold, like they haven't warmed up with any competition matches. But the main issue there is that the top 16 people now have to come much earlier to the competition. And so I looked in the rules about this, and according to organizational rule 0.85, the competition consists of 2 phases, a preliminary phase and a main phase, each of which are run on one day. And then it defines a preliminary phase as 1 round of pools, from which 20 to 30% of participants in the pools are eliminated. After the pools, the top 16 people are moved into the main tableau, and then the remainder of the fencers qualifying from the pools will make up the preliminary, integral, direct elimination table. So basically what I explained before. Then the main phase consists of integral, direct elimination, but essentially this clause says that the preliminary phase of pools and preliminary DEs is fenced on one day, and the main phase, which is the top 64 all the way through the final, is fenced on another day. But the schedule in Doha ignores that. And so all the fencers who are going to this event, at least everyone in the top 16 that I've spoken to, booked their flights without looking at the schedule because this is the way it's supposed to be, this is the way it says it in the rules. One of the fencers in the top 16 sent me a picture of the Doha schedule, and it said basically that at the end of the preliminary days, the main table of 64 would happen, and then after that, on the main day, they would start with the main table of 32. So this meant that all of the top 16 fencers who had already booked their flights and their hotels now had to rebook them. And in the case of the men, that meant coming in a full day earlier to fence. In the case of the women, it meant coming in 2 full days earlier. And one of the top 16 fencers in the world on the women's side told me that because she had to rebook her flights and hotels for herself, her coach, and her dad, it was essentially about $1,500 extra. Now, fast forward to now. Yesterday, the Doha invitation was reposted to say that the top 64 had been moved from the preliminary day where it was not supposed to be but was, back to the second day where it was supposed to be in the first place. This pissed off a lot of the top fencers because all of them had to rebook their flights to be either 1 day earlier for men, 2 days earlier for women, and now they're being told 2 days before that the schedule's back to normal, and so many of them had to take off extra days of work, many of them, our student athletes, had to skip extra days of school, and in addition to paying all the costs of having to change all those things at the last second, that doesn't really seem fair to them. And I've been told from a few of my contacts in the FIE that the reason that this was scheduled this way in the first place was because it was better for scheduling for the people running the competition, but then the reason it was changed back was because a bunch of the coaches complained that the top 16 fencers would have too much of an advantage doing this against people who were already tired, and a bunch of coaches insisted that this be changed back, and they did it 2 days before without telling anybody. One of the FIE people I asked for comment about this was apparently getting on a plane to go to this competition and learned about it from me as he was about to take off. So this was a colossal mess up that cost the top 16 people in both men and women quite a bit of time, money, and inconvenience for literally nothing. And these mess-ups happen, but this was completely avoidable. Having the tableau this way, according to the rules that I was able to find, wasn't even legal and shouldn't have been allowed to happen in the first place. And the fact that nobody was notified of the odd format or of the change in format is completely unacceptable to me. But what do you guys think of this situation? It's certainly a little bit crazy, but that's just my opinion. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments, and I really hope that something like this doesn't happen again because it's ridiculous. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Guys, thank you for listening again. If you made it this far, I know that you're really a big fan of the channel, and if you want to consider donating to my Patreon account or my Venmo or PayPal account, it really helps me out a lot. Anyway, thank you so much. I will see you in the next video.